Okay.
Just as a reminder that we are now live streaming on YouTube. I'm sorry, I got started a few minutes early, guys. So we are officially on air.
Okay.
And Bridget, maybe one thing you might want to do is close your blinds behind you. That would help us see you maybe a little better, if that's possible. Oh, look at that. Emmerich, I see the
So all you had to do is make that statement, Melissa, to shut everybody up.
Melissa, can you hear me?
Yes,
Thank you.
Can you read what I have on my shirt?
yes. Excellent.
There you go.
Like your fashion choice, Mayor.
Well, no one has accused me of having fashion sense. I can guarantee.
Kathleen, that background looks good. Thumbs up.
We have 5 commissioners on, is that right?
Well, I see Commissioner Walters' name
Six.
up there. Is he on?
Yes, there.
Yes, I'm
Okay,
on.
great.
We are live. I'm being texted that by about 3 other people. We know that. We're just making sure we have everyone on.
Rocky is working with Commissioner Kane right now on phone.
Okay. And Commissioner Philbrook is now joining.
And I see Commissioner Ramirez. But I haven't heard Philbrook or Ramirez.
I'm here.
There we go.
I'm here. I just didn't unmute me. And you can see the top of my head. Woo!
Hi, Jane.
Hey, I like the backlit. That way you can't really see my face.
This is Debbie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Melissa, can you tell us again how to send a little post privately to someone? I'm forgetting where that button is.
I'm not showing the chat feature on my window.
I actually have it disabled for this meeting.
Oh, okay.
And I explained that last night, and that's due to the Open Meetings Act. So we do not want that chat feature available. So.
Good.
All right, are we ready to go, guys?
Well, I think we're short Kane, Johnson, and Burrows. Is that correct? Are either any of those 3 on?
One person just came into the attendee box, but that was Ken Moore. So no, I'm not even seeing them aligning to get in.
We want to make sure everybody's on.
I think we had Johnson all lined up. They were calling Commissioner Burrows a few times today.
Okay, so I raised my hand. You guys are ignoring it. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk since we're not doing anything yet. I'm going to turn my picture off and I will be here. I'll turn it back on after I get through eating my dinner.
I did not see her hand raised. So does the hand raise show up on the picture of the person or down below?
Mayor,
It'll show up in your
what you'll need
participants
to-
window.
Yeah. Look at
Yeah.
your middle thing at the bottom. Participants, click that
Yeah.
up. It'll
Okay,
show up
because it
there.
keeps. All right.
And Rocky and I will manage that. Either her or I will manage it and let you know if someone's raising their hand, okay?
Okay, well, I see it now on the right, the participants list, and then shows whether they're
Yeah.
muted or not. Okay.
And then I'll go ahead and raise my hand just so you see how the little blue hand comes up in the list. And Doug did too.
And there you are. Doug,
Did you just get muted, Mayor? Oh, that's a good feature.
Hey everyone, are we good to start live stream or the, I guess, UGTV around 5:15?
Mayor, you want to hold on a couple of minutes, or
I
think
do.
Susan
I
can throw a
don't.
heads up.
Yeah, I think we need just to bring everybody on.
Okay.
Rocky said she's still working with Commissioner Kane and trying to figure that out.
Okay.
Mariah, how much advance time do you need for us to turn you on? For you to turn it on?
A couple minutes if possible.
Okay.
I'm still figuring it all out myself, so more time never hurts me.
Okay.
Doug, are you watching for messages?
Ken can't get the audio, but he's watching it on YouTube. Let me see if he's in his office.
He's in City Hall.
He's on as a, what do you call it, a panelist, right? So he can speak. Because if he's on YouTube, he's going to be a little behind.
He won't be able to speak if he's on YouTube.
Doug, have him call my cell and I'll walk him through it.
But he won't be able to speak from YouTube, correct? Okay. So, as long as no one talks, messes me up. So from here is where we play videos at the beginning, like intros and stuff. Right. And that intro, oops, let me see. Let me mute myself on this thing. So,
why we're doing this.
So do we have any idea, anybody in contact with Rocky to see if she's able to help them out?
Rocky stated she's working with Commissioner Kane. I have Commissioner Burrows on the phone trying to get him set up now.
I tried calling Commissioner Johnson and could not reach him.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm still working with Kane. It looks like he's in, but I'm trying to get his audio and video down.
Commissioner Kane, can you talk?
Melissa, Commissioner Burrows is waiting in the queue, and can you unmute Kane to see if he can talk?
Hello? Hello?
That's Commissioner Kane?
We can hear you, Commissioner Kane.
Okay, Commissioner Burrows, say something. I don't hear you.
He's still muted.
Man, is better?
There you go.
Yes.
We got you now.
Okay.
Can you unmute Commissioner Kane one more time to test him?
Go.
Kane's still muted. I think you unmuted Burrows. Oh, now they both are.
Commissioner Kane. He's unmuted, so.
Did you hear him talk or no?
Briefly once.
They can't hear you.
Well, nobody's talking right now. We're completely stone cold silent.
Well, we're glad we have a meeting like this to get everybody signed in and practice it a little bit before we have a formal meeting where we have to take action on. So you kind of get a chance to test it out a little bit.
Yes,
I'll
sir.
be offering background training lessons.
Yeah, uh-huh.
I can help you find the perfect background for you.
Oh, okay, so I can hit that mute and that,
Now you're muted to the group.
What website did you say you picked that off of?
Pixabay, P-I-X-A, I think it's either B-U-Y or B-A-Y. But they're free downloads and you can kind of search what you want. You can search by color or by like, I want a garden or whatever. And then you just download it and you put it in your little Zoom virtual background area. So I have a selection. I was saying earlier, I don't think you were on, Doug, BRR, there's heavy competition to have really nice backgrounds, as you can imagine, and they like draw them and fancy stuff like that. So I got to step up my game.
Yeah, I bet that's.
You just do like Commissioner
you
McKiernan
let
and just
Kane
take a
in,
picture
please?
of our summer home.
And then the other important thing is to make sure your light is in front of you rather than behind you.
We are on live right now, so
And the other important thing is to pro tip for everybody watching.
we are on live right now. So
I do have a window behind me and I can't block it. The sun will go down shortly.
So you guys are going to get a side lighting of me because I'm not shutting off any more lights.
Can you unmute Kane and
I
see if you
just
can hear
did.
him for a second?
I just did. I can't add him as a participant though, because he's coming in as a number.
All I have to say is I'm surprised by how much I look like my mother every day.
Yeah, it's really awkward to get used to watching yourself talk and you think, do I always look like that when I talk? I'm never speaking again.
I just ask, is my nose really that big? And apparently it is.
Commissioner Johnson's on his way. We are streaming live on YouTube right now. So if we want to go ahead and start, I will work with him and Rocky to get him in. But we are going out live.
Can you please unmute Kane for just a second?
He's unmuted.
Commissioner Kane, are you there?
Just leave it on.
I still show that he is muted.
He is not muted. I will give you host. He is not muted.
Do you guys think it's good for me to schedule at 5:30?
You are unmuted by host. There we go.
There we go.
Mayor, can Mariah turn this to start at 5:30?
Did I start my video?
That gives us 3 minutes. That'll work.
Okay.
Damn, I look good.
Hi, Mike.
Are you looking at something other than what we're looking at?
My
I'm
computer's
gonna
been
walk
infected
around
with
my
the
house,
virus.
see my bear and my deer and my hogs and everything.
I think
Thanks
my
for
computer's been infected with the virus. Look at this guy.
All right, we are scheduled UGTV at 5:30.
Thank you.
I want to remind everyone though, we are live on UGTV or on YouTube. So we are, just because she's starting the UGTV channel, we are live.
All right, go ahead and check the one. Okay, come over there. Well, if you sit there, it'll be one.
All right, everyone, we got about 1 minute.
Hey, has Commissioner Johnson come on yet? No? I will make a call. Thank you.
No, he's on his way, Rocky. I just text you back.
Okay. Thank you.
Ten seconds.
Okay, I think we're ready to get going. Before I call the meeting to order, I want to announce that due to COVID-19, we have some individuals attending in person as well as by conference call. All participants joining by phone should mute their phones when not speaking to avoid background noise. And during the meeting, please make sure that you announce yourself by name and title every time you speak so that the public who is participating knows who is speaking. This is critical given the number of remote participants and his current guidance from Kansas Attorney General. We'll now call the meeting to order. Thank everyone for being here tonight. I'd ask the clerk to announce the meeting and call the roll. Whoa.
Bridget, we can't hear you.
Not able to hear.
It worked last night. This is frustrating.
Mayor, I'll go ahead and call it, if that's all right. A special session is being called for the discussion of upcoming strategies regarding budget workshop for purposes to discuss priorities and revenue projections for the unified government. Roll call. Alvey?
Here.
McKernan?
Here.
Bynum?
Here.
Markley?
Here.
Walters?
Here.
Burrows?
Here.
Kane?
Here.
Townsend?
Here.
Ramirez?
Here.
Philbrook?
Here.
Johnson? Okay, Mayor?
Tonight, again, we're having a retreat regarding priority-based budgeting and the 2021 budget. Mr. Bach.
Thank you, Mayor. As we started to work on this from a retreat standpoint that we'd had in place for a while and putting together our details, we quickly realized that trying to break out a session and do a follow-up on PBB like we had done the last time we came together for a retreat was going to be a little difficult. We'd kind of gone through some programming to see how we could set out and do groups of threes. But there seemed to be some issues. We had some concerns regarding some of the open meeting issues since we wouldn't have any members of the public in place. And also just the sheer time period it takes to do that and kind of being broke up like this. So for our first meeting, we decided we'd maybe refocus this a little bit. One, with what's going on with the stay-at-home order in place, it is having an impact on revenues around the community. So we thought it would be good to talk about some potential impacts. And Kathleen's not going to be in a position to come out tonight and show you what's happened because, you know, we're just now getting February numbers back. So we don't have any impact of knowing what happened exactly in March, but we can think about different areas and start to make adjustments, or thinking about the fact we are going to have to make adjustments through 2020 and then look at 21. So we'll go through and spend a fair amount of time talking about that, because that's first and foremost for us as we start to build our budget. And then we'll look at some, we will still look at some of our PBB and program prioritization. I don't want to just drop that. We just won't spend as much time on it. Molly Saunders is here from Shockey Consulting. She's on the line with us too, so she'll take on a part of that. So that's really how we're setting this up tonight, to move through it. So we'll kind of inform you about where we are, get some discussion regarding that, and then move on for a few other areas. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Kathleen Von Atchen, our Chief Financial Officer, who's going to go through a presentation we have worked up on our revenue updates. Kathleen?
Thanks, Doug. So at some point, Melissa's going to share the screen for the PowerPoint that we provided you, correct? Just so you know, my team has been working on the revenue estimates over the past week. We sat down and talked a little bit about different scenarios. And Melissa, is the PowerPoint going to be on the screen? Melissa?
I thought.
I can't hear you. What'd you say?
I said I will go grab it. I thought you were sharing it. I'll bring it up. Just a minute.
Oh, all right. Well, I can share it. But...
No, just let me do it. It's fine.
Okay. Well, so last Wednesday we had a budget kickoff meeting with the departments, and at that time we had developed some preliminary revenue estimates, but then that was pretty much the first day or maybe a few days after the shelter-in-place order had gone in place. And after talking with them, we started to realize the true impact of, because the Legends and all of the stores had been, closing little by little. And so we realized that, and then we learned more since last week about how there's a potential that the shelter-in-place order or that direction is going to be perhaps expanded beyond just the 1 month that we had talked about. And so the need for us is to actually come up with, all kinds of scenarios just in case. And of course, we're not adopting the budget until, we don't have to finalize our revenue estimates until May or so. So we still have, by then we'll have a little bit more information. The biggest revenue estimate that we think will be impacted is sales and use tax. And as you know, we don't get information on actual activity until 2 months after it's happened. So just yesterday, we got our March distribution, and that's for activity that occurred, or retail activity that occurred in January. So we don't have any idea at this moment how the sales taxes are being impacted. The funny thing is, one of the finance directors in Johnson County mentioned that it's sort of like putting a blindfold on and then just throwing a dart. But we all came up with a methodology. A couple of the finance directors and I talked, and what we identified is that we can look through all our vendors, those that are remitting sales tax, and they can tell us a little by little what we can discern which businesses are essential or open and which ones are not. And then we can kind of make some assumptions as to of the ones that are open, at what level are they actually having activity? Is it diminished or what have you? We made some assumptions based on that. Then we also, so we're going to give you an overview of the revenue situation for just the general fund, and then also do a financial overview of the future. So you'll see that as well. So go to the first slide. So the first slide, rather than landing on one specific scenario, meaning the present, what we have done is provide a series of 3 scenarios, or 4 actually. The first one is a strong economy, as if COVID had not happened at all, because we were under a very, we did have a very good economy until this hit. The second scenario is if the shelter in place were just in place for one month. The third scenario is if the shelter in place for 2 months, and based on, because we're trying to be prudent, and we certainly want to make sure that we consider all the operational impacts, we're going with that third scenario. The worst one would be if we're shelter in place for 2 months, plus then there's a fall wave where folks start getting sick in the latter parts in the fall, in October. So here you see a scenario. We've picked out the major revenue categories that are impacted. Since this is the general fund, we don't have in here, for example, hotel and motel taxes, which would also be impacted, but that's a different fund. So as you can see, on the sales tax side, this is all sales and use tax, including the STAR bonds. We were expecting to collect around $50 million. And with the 1 month, it drops down to 48.5. And then with 2 months of shelter in place, it's $48 million. So we're losing roughly $2 million in sales tax between the strong economy and the 2-month stay. On property tax, it only decreases somewhat, but mainly because we're projecting that our delinquency rate, which was doing very well. We were previously projected at around 5.6%. Previously, during the financial meltdown, it had been up in the 8 or 9%. So, but we had it at 5.6 under the strong economy. But now with all of this hit, we're predicting that it probably is going to be going up to around 7% in 2020 and then 6% in 2021. Casino revenues, we are projecting that there will be a growth rate on the base, during the times that casinos are open, but with their closure for 2 months, it diminishes the amount of revenue that they'll be bringing in. And then the pilot, we are projecting that potentially there may be an impact as households have trouble paying their bill. And, the BPU is working with their customers on that, but it would impact the payment in lieu of tax that comes to the UG. Next slide. So the next slide is, next slide. Yeah, maybe there's a delay. Okay, yeah, the next slide actually shows the impact of the three scenarios. And the one that we're expecting and that we need to budget for is where there is an $11.5 million reduction in our estimated revenues for fiscal 2020. And you've got to understand, this is the current fiscal year. We've already gone through 3 months of that. So the range of revenue impact goes from 13.5 million with the third scenario to 5.5 million if we were just in place for 1 month. Next slide. I think you need is that the next slide? Yes, okay. So there is a website that our health department has also been referring to. I got it from Bill Gates on LinkedIn, but it actually is the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation. And the information, if you want to go to that, is provided there. What they're estimating is that our peak demand for beds, hospital beds and ICU beds, will happen around April 28th. And so this is why I'm recommending that we incorporate a 2-month shelter in place situation into our revenue estimates, because we predict that likely, the diminished revenue will probably last through the middle of May. Next slide. So how does that impact our financial performance or our financial situation? I just wanted to demonstrate that the budget outlook for 2020 is the first series of bars is our current budget or the original budget. We expected to bring in $23 million and spend 223 million and spend 226 million, which meant that we were going to, budgeting for to draw down our reserves by 3.6 million, leaving us with a cash balance of cash basis fund balance of $25 million. Unfortunately, though, now so the second scenario actually, because the original budget, the revenue estimates were done in the May of last year, we didn't really know how the economy was working. And so had we not had a COVID incident, then we would have collected about $1 million more in revenue, was my projection before the COVID crisis came. And of course, just for estimating purposes, I'm leaving the expenditure side the same. So that's the task or the challenge that we have ahead of us. So anyway, so the original budget as amended under a strong economy would have resulted in a net negative or drawdown of the fund balance of 2.6 million, leaving a total for the the three general funds combined of $26 million. And as I mentioned before, the COVID impact is $11.5 million, assuming a 2-month shelter in place. So as a result, we are now expecting a decline of 14.6 to a fund balance of 14.6 million. So next slide. So now what we're going to show you here is how that impacts on the CAFR fund balance and our net position in our financial statements that we report to our creditors. So the first series is what we currently we're in the middle of completing our financial audit. So our preliminary actuals are represented for 2019 are provided there for your review. We are expecting to end the fiscal year of last year with a net position in our general fund of 20% of expenditures. So we're expecting to end the fund balance of $41.8 million, which represents 20% of the 2019 expenditures. Our reserve, as you know, we recommend that we maintain 2 months of operating expenditures, which is approximately 17%. So we're in good financial shape because we're in excess of our target reserve. And we're very grateful to the Commission for your support in working towards that, because this situation with COVID is the exact reason why we need to have a reserve. So for 2020, given the 2-month shelter in place, we are expecting to, if we were not to reduce any expenditures in the current fiscal year, and we would end with a fund balance of only 12%. Now, that seems pretty alarming, but you must understand that many of or all of the municipalities in the United States are having the same problem, and the credit rating agencies have all expressed that they will be factoring that in. Of course, they also expect us to take action in some form in order to diminish that impact. In 2021, we have preliminary revenue estimates growing to $228 million from the $212 figure in 2020. And we expect expenditures to be roughly $231.5 million. Now, how does that, we determined that we thought, well, let's increase salaries and benefits all across the board by 3%, and then increase service above the budgeted base. Services and supplies would all be increased by about 2%. So we did some estimating and to derive that preliminary $231 million number. And of course, as we enter into the budget process, we will be, of course, examining all of that, both in the 2020 and 2021. But if we did nothing with, and did not make any reductions to diminish the impact of COVID, we're projecting that the fund balance at the end of 2021 will be 11% of expenditures. So as I mentioned before, we don't have a lot, we have less time to make reductions in the current year than you thought. So given the fact that 1/3 of the fiscal year has already been completed, the total cost reductions to achieve the $11.5 million would calculate to about $1.2 million per month. And what that means is every month we wait to put in place actions to diminish that cost reduction is just more that we have to cut in the future. So, of course, we do want to diminish the operational impact on our citizens and in the services we provide and so forth, but delays in implementing this is a one-time reallocation. So it just is made more challenging if we wait. Next slide. So of course, there are a variety of options. Many of these options you probably might remember if you were part of the 2009 Great Recession. One of the options is to pause the labor negotiations impacting salary increases in the future 3 years. Many of those negotiations are ongoing, and some are near completion. So that's one thing to take a look at. The other, another option is perhaps instituting a hiring freeze for non-public safety personnel. That would provide us with some cost savings. Of course, we would want to do that very carefully without diminishing our current service delivery. Also, we could reduce the 2020 operating expenditure budgets down to the 2019 level or even lower. So we just go in and work with the departments and find where there's savings that people could perhaps delay certain projects to future years and not do them this year. And then the last thing is just to reduce 2020 cash funded capital projects and various equipment. There's not as much money there as you would think. It's not entirely discretionary because, half or more of those funds are actually obligated as part of lease purchase agreements. So for vehicle acquisitions. Next slide. And by the way, just so you know, back to that slide before, I did want to mention that, of course, there are other options and we are open to suggestions from you or the public or anyone, but none of this conversation here takes into consideration that there may be additional revenues coming in as a result of negotiations and congressional actions that may take place in the future. And then of course we can't predict what's going to happen. So perhaps at this point, perhaps the impact that I'm estimating may be not as bad as it that I have outlined here. So we're going to keep a close look at it, and trust me, we're looking at it every day. So okay, next slide. And as I mentioned before, we have a fund balance, and I am so grateful for your support on this fund balance reserve policy. you adopted it a couple years ago with the intent of having sufficient resources in case there's an emergency or economic disruption or a natural disaster. And that's certainly what's happening now. It allows the UG to dip in the reserve to meet unanticipated needs that are critical to operations. So, and just as a reminder, it requires a presentation and your commission direction action on a plan for replenishing the reserve so that we accumulate enough to equal 2 months of operating expenditures. But that plan is over a future 5-year period. Now, certainly waiting 5 years till we reach that back to that threshold would be probably not the best, not my suggestion, because the credit rating agencies are going to be watching us. But we don't have to necessarily reach that target again this year. We can work on it over the next couple of years. And as long as we have a plan, then I think that would be helpful, not only for our credit rating, but also for our own selves, because we do want to make sure that we have funds in case there's another disaster that happens. So that's all. Next slide. All right, so are there any questions on the financial overview? I'm happy to answer any questions.
Kathleen, this is Commissioner Burrows. Thank you for a thorough presentation. I truly believe your numbers are absolutely spot on in reference to what I've been seeing in other places. The 1.2 million a month. I will just state up front that we should prepare in moving forward for the worst case scenario. Anything less than that will be seen as a budget plus for us. Those are my early statements coming out, but I'm not trying to sound alarm. I'm just stating as the fiscal prudent that I am, I would state that your recommendation for 2 should be the minimum that we should consider.
Yeah, so I did a little research, and there was an interesting video on YouTube about how Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas reacted to the 1918 Spanish flu. And they talked a lot about how the municipalities, their reaction to it, and what businesses opened and which ones didn't open, and how that impacted the second and third wave. So I think a lot of the measures that we certainly are putting in place are going to diminish a reinfection of our population in the fall, but that's certainly a possibility. So,
Mr. Bach, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to follow up a little bit on what Kathleen said, that as we look at this and recognizing if we project out a couple of months, that we probably don't want to go after our reserves to take on the full blunt of the $11.5 million hit. Could be a little more, could be less, hopefully, but I don't know that I could look at that and think. I think that 11.5 million is probably, and that's a very preliminary number that she's come up with too. So it's not like 2 months just fixes us in. We say that's exactly what it's going to be. But to me, as we threw out different things between personnel, capital, it kind of changes the direction of where we're going with this year's budget. Instead of looking ahead saying, okay, we're probably going to fund up or try to do some additional programming. I can't sit here today and make any recommendation that we would be adding anything in any area. In fact, most of our areas are going to be struggling to be able to do what they're doing. As we noted yesterday when we had a couple of COVID cases come about. Well, one of them is in our parks area where we do a lot of mowing, and that just set down a whole bunch of crews. So I mean, because of the potential. So right now, when we start going out and hitting out in the field at one of our peak times, we're dropping I think at least 14 people that are going to be quarantined for a while in that area. So that's going to have an impact on how we look in the community. and that's going to go on for a couple of months during this time frame. So operationally, we're going to see a lot of strains put on us. So we'll probably be spending all the additional money we come up with or move around from a lot of areas to, one, pay overtime to keep people going, or to buy in special equipment and things like that. So there's still a lot of other unknowns that factor in. So we laid this out here this evening that it's kind of our time when I sit down with you all and start saying, well, let's get our guidance and think about where we're going for the future. But as we started doing our revenue projections, I guess it comes to the point it doesn't really seem like I don't know if there's a lot of different thoughts, and that's where I wanted to get it from you all. As we laid out there, some of the things, none of our labor unions have come back and accepted contracts with us yet. I think a few of them are getting ready to move forward with votes. If we're going to do that, that does lock us in. We don't see anything that says our long term is going to be off, but they are things that impact this year's budget. So we wanted to throw all these things out there and kind of have a chance to be able to talk about it and kick it around and get your input.
Oop, oop.
I think you're muted, Mayor.
Yeah.
I'm not in favor at this time of, we're in the midst of these labor negotiations. I don't think it's, prudent at this point to pause those and to renegotiate, especially with those unions who've already gone through the process fully. I think we let that play out a little bit more. I'm not personally in favor of changing that movement.
Gail Townsend would like to speak.
Please go ahead.
Okay, now that I'm unmuted, good evening, everybody. Could I see the screen again as we're talking about these options that was put up? I think there were 4 options listed. I'd like to see that screen again if we could put that back up.
And Commissioner, I don't want to qualify that they're the only 4 options. But they are ones that when we look at our largest areas of spend, and we're looking at that much money, so that's why we threw those out here, along with obviously hitting our reserves.
Okay, thank you. I'm just curious, the second one, institute a hiring freeze for non-public safety personnel. Do we have any idea what the financial impact of that would be from month to month if that was the option we pursued?
So Commissioner Townsend, actually that would be arranged depending on how much of a freeze we would institute. So if it were, every position that became vacant, we would hold, and for how long that position is vacant, it just kind of depends. So my guess is we could probably target between $2 to $4 million depending on when people vacate the position and which ones they are. So
okay, so this option contemplates people who are already on the payroll with us.
yeah, and if they vacated the position, then would not rehire it until in 2021.
Okay, well, going back a couple of budget years and the presentation that talked about the silver tsunami, I mean, just based on those numbers and of course the unforeseen, you're saying that we could do 2.4 for the year, for the month, for the quarter?
No, between $2 and $4 million throughout for the year, but it just depends on, the extent to which we would freeze positions. If we were like 100% freeze, but it sort of depends also when people actually vacate the position. So I'm just giving a range.
Yeah, and I want to make sure, Kathleen, you're thinking about that in terms of taking out all the public safety personnel in relation to that, because, and the reason I hold them back out is they're all out there going full guns right now. and we're paying overtime, so it's really not practical to hold back. Even if we said we wanted to in those areas, it would cost us money if we made that move. It's also a hard one to look at when you look in so many of the other areas. I can't really pull back in public health today, or my public works crews that are out doing different things. They're getting called into many different areas, and then parks are busier now than they've ever been. So
Yeah, it would, yes, absolutely. So it would diminish our service level delivery. For example, in motor vehicle, if we were to, there's a lot of, we get a lot of, rehires. There's because our motor vehicle staff often find other opportunities in the UG to expand their careers, and so there's vacancies quite a bit in motor vehicle. And if we were not to rehire them, then the wait times in our motor vehicle registration division would be really diminished or expanded.
Commissioner Walters would like to speak. Commissioner Walters, I'm going to unmute you.
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to comment on the one of the options, the pause of labor negotiations. I know we talked about some directions several weeks ago before this all happened, or as it was happening. And since we really don't know the financial impact yet, I don't think we can just go forward as if nothing is happening. So I would be inclined to not enter into any long-term commitments at this time. I think pause is a good word. We may know much more in a month or two than we know now. So I would be for not immediately pushing through the agreements that we are currently negotiating, and pause them until we know more about the future.
So, well, one thing I did want to raise also is that what the projections I've shown you don't factor in whether there will be a COVID impact in terms of reoccurring infections in 2021. So if you all feel that that is overly optimistic, then and as we develop the budget for 2021, we should incorporate that into the revenue estimates as well. Yeah, I'm not an expert, and it's difficult to know. So just so you know, that's something we're probably going to be exploring in the coming weeks.
Commissioner Kane would like to speak.
Go right ahead.
We can't hear you.
Can you?
Yes.
I kind of disagree with Jim and agree with the mayor. I think we need to push forward. You know, there's so much going on that we don't want to put our labor guys or any of our employees on the back burner. I know that what we're doing tonight is important because we have to, but I also think to continue in good faith with our bargaining reps and all our employees to make it a better place and to work with them as best we can, even though we're in these certain circumstances.
Are there any other comments or questions regarding this piece of the presentation? Okay, hearing none, we'll move forward.
All right, well, thank you. And if you have additional thoughts or input as we go on, I'd welcome a call or, whatever comments, we can talk about it. more if you think about it more offline. With that, I think we're going to try to talk about a little bit of our PBB, and as we start to work on this more, we really realized the advantages if we had the PBB in place, because then we have all those priorities set out and our targets that we were going after, and it doesn't mean we're going to quit on that. It's just a little slower process, that it's not one that we can turn it for today. It's one that you make those changes and they impact more where we at in maybe into 21 or more like 22 and 23. So Kathleen, I think you and Molly were going to take us into these next sections.
Yes, thank you. So back to the PowerPoint, please. All right, so we've had a variety of presentations with you to review or talk about or give an overview of the process for developing the priority-based budgeting. But so the next series of slides is actually more a reference material for you. I'm not going to go over them individually, but maybe kind of lead through this a little bit. The next slide, just keep in mind that the purpose, the next slide, the purpose of PBB, what's the process? And by the way, I'm going through this because there were a number of questions that were raised at the January retreat. Really appreciate your participation and support for the priority-based budgeting process. I thought that the last retreat we had was very beneficial, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. Next slide. So naturally, the purpose of priority-based budgeting is to identify priorities for our community and then align the programs to meet our goals. It basically answers the question, why do we need to identify the priorities for the city and then align the projects with those results? So, why are we in business? So we're basically trying to figure out how much does each program contribute to each of our strategic goals. And naturally, part of the reason we are in business is to provide safety to our citizens, to provide a sense of cohesion among our community, and to improve and enhance the health of our residents, among other goals. So there was some questions about the timeline for the priority-based budgeting process. So over the past few years, we as staff have been working with the collection of the data in order to get to this final review stage. That's where we've been. We started by doing an inventory of all the programs or services that the unified government provides. And then we figured out how much all those programs cost. And then we had the departments, starting with the department director and their senior staff, reviewing each of those programs and determining how does that program achieve each of the 7 goals. So, for example, general clinic services that the health department provides, it certainly is very strongly aligned with the community health goal, but maybe less aligned with, say, public relations or community outreach. Although that certainly has come up, it's an important priority now. But each service has an inherent purpose, but it doesn't necessarily achieve the same result or level of result for all of the 7 programs we have. It's less aligned with infrastructure, for example, general clinics, clinician, services is less aligned with infrastructure than it would be with its own health goal, for example. The second review actually took place with all of the department heads submitting their scores for their programs. Then we had a peer review process where every strategic goal, all the 7 of them, had a peer review group, and that group had a myriad, 3 or 4 or 5 subject matter experts for the various departments amongst, within the UG staff. And they sat down and they looked at and reviewed all of the programs for the given goal that they were assigned to. So the public safety peer review group had 7 people on it, and the infrastructure group had 6 or 7 people on it from different disciplines. And they worked together collaboratively to review the scoring of the department heads. And that provided a little bit of independence in the scoring. And they changed those scores based on their knowledge of the services provided. You understand all of the input here, because we all live in Wyandotte County. We also were looking at it from a perspective as a resident and as a customer of these services. So all those scores were reviewed, went through that second layer of review. And then the final review was conducted by our executive team and the budget staff in order to make sure that some of the programs across the departments, whether they needed to be combined or not, or if there was some programs that really ought to be combined with each other because it made sense. And so that kind of cleanup took place too. So that's where we are now, is that we are now analyzing the data and ready to utilize it for decision making. So the next slide. So just to give you a little idea, of we have all the programs. So back in October, we used 2020 data and we analyzed all the programs. We figured out that there's 304 community programs. Those are programs that are offered to our residents. And then there's 131 governance programs, which are more internal programs. For example, the finance department and HR and legal, those sorts of programs. So all the programs were reviewed, not only by the department head, but then also the peer review group. So every program got an individual score of, and combined, there's about 5,000 individual scores. So the software system does a calculation of the logarithm in order to figure out what the final scores are. And as I mentioned, that peer review process that took place in November last year. And so there are 46 participants across 19 departments. There's 7 strategic goals, 5 basic program attributes. So not only is there the 7 strategic goals, there's also basic program attributes that we'll talk about a little later. And then the governance programs had their own governance goals. Next slide. So just a reminder, these are the 7 strategic goals from which every program was evaluated. So each program looked at each one of the 7 goals to see how closely aligned or how it contributed towards achieving the result voiced in each of those 7 goals. So, okay. Now, just a reminder, so every program not only is evaluated against the 7 results or goals, which contributes to 75% of their weight, but they were also given certain basic program attributes, which constituted 25% of their score weight. And some of those attributes include, what portion of the community does the program serve? Does it collect revenues, and to what extent does the revenue collection recover the cost of providing the service? And is there a possibility that the service could be provided by a nonprofit organization or just the private sector? How reliant are we on that service by government? And then whether the program is mandated by the state or federal government. And also the other one was whether the demand for services is increasing or decreasing. So, so the next slide. So just so you have an idea, so when we were scoring each of the programs, not only the departments, but also the peer review groups, they were asking themselves this question. So within the context of a goals definition, which we provided you with the opportunity to refine the goal definitions at a previous budget session. But the question we asked ourselves is, do you believe that the program has a high degree of influence in achieving the overall result? So if, so Public Works, for example, their engineering division, they probably have a very, would give themselves a very high score in the infrastructure strategic goal, because their engineering work would correlate very highly with the overall result of improving our infrastructure. So that goal, for that goal, it would get a 4 because it's essential. But in terms of engineering, how much it impacts, for example, public health or some other area, it may get a lesser, less strong or some influence. So that's an example. So every program and every goal was evaluated on that measure. So, we combined all these scores, the software calculated the weight for all of these scores, and then it calculated a final score for all of the programs, given all of those scoring done by all those folks. And so it just basically generated a list of all the programs based on the math, right? And so of all the 300 programs that are community-based, every program got a final score. And if you do a sort from highest to lowest, you can figure out, where that program stands amongst the quartiles. And we just basically took all 300, divided them by 4, and that's how each program landed within the 4 quartiles, with quartile 1 being those programs that have the 4th highest scores, and quartile 2, those programs that have the 2nd highest scores, and 3rd and 4th. The average typically is between this curve here. Those programs that are in quartile 3 and 2 are typically where most of the programs land. Okay. So at this point now, we just want to, we have all the data, what do we do with it, right? So of course, we've all talked about how the unified government has a lot of needs that are not funded because we just haven't been able to identify the resources. Some of those needs are all of the infrastructure improvements that our community needs in order to have, in order to diminish the expected failing streets if we don't invest in our streets and roads, or for the replacement of all our aging fire stations, or, there's just a whole slew. But also on the operating side, there's also there's a need for additional funding in order to undertake new initiatives that would greatly improve the delivery of service to our residents. So certainly there's a lot of new programs and current programs. And what we need to do is take a look at our current base and determine which programs are we currently providing that perhaps maybe we need to reevaluate. So there are a variety, 6 different categories from which we could identify additional resources within our base. And of course, there's new revenues we can generate, but then there's also opportunities for freeing up resources through changing maybe how we outsource or provide our service, by improving our efficiency, or by discussing what service level do we need to deliver for that specific program. So this is called the PBB Blueprint. And this is, we talked a little bit in January about providing ourselves with an objective to try and achieve some, or to give ourselves a target. And we did at the last retreat talk about trying to achieve 15 million over the next 3 years. So of course that's that's just a goal that we thought we would try and work towards. So and of course this conversation is in the coming week, tonight and in the coming weeks, will help us get to that. So now I'm going to pass it on to, or I'm happy to answer any questions And then after that, we're going to have Molly start with a facilitation of further discussion. So any questions on that overview?
Commissioner Bynum would like to speak.
Thank you. I just wonder, given our current reality, if we were to go back and do all of those exercises again today, how those programs would shake out in terms of priorities. Because I have the feeling that things that may not have been scored in a higher quartile 3 months ago certainly might score there now. And I just think we're living in a new world. And that's it.
Commissioner McKiernan would like to speak.
Thank you. The last time we got together in a special session, we had sheets that showed all of the rankings. I was curious, have those been updated in any way since we last got together, or are they the same?
No, the scores have not changed at all. No, they went through that whole process last fall, and that's what they are. In fact, the routine for actually rescoring the programs is not something that we do every year, and it's done based on whether we all agree that there's a need to do that. So.
And I guess my other question would be, given the fact that they haven't changed, would it have been advantageous for us to have reviewed those before we sat down tonight?
So what we're going to do tonight, Molly's going to talk a little bit about that, is we're not actually going to be interacting on this, in this electronic means medium. Instead, what we're going to have you do is, well, Molly's going to provide you with the survey, and she's going to talk about that. And but in addition, I know one feedback we got is that you would like to have more information on each of the programs. And so I will be also providing you that tomorrow morning. That was not part of your packet, but it's going to be kind of a big, thick document with additional information on each program.
Okay. Any other questions on the general process? Okay, so last time when we got together, it was a different world, and we went through the exercise of having small groups get together and look at programs that had been scored already by staff through the process that Kathleen outlined. And you all took a look at those that had landed in the 3rd and 4th quartiles. So the lowest priority programs in the staff rankings. And I think that there was some really good conversation around those programs, and you were asked at the time to kind of decide the fate of each program, whether it was to continue the program, whether it was to take a closer look at it and look at some of the options like outsourcing, or doing it more efficiently, or simply we need to stop the program. So some of the feedback that we had, like Kathleen mentioned, that we need more information. Some of the things that are on these cards that we're looking at, we don't know what this necessarily means. So we're providing more information to you on some of those details, which I'll talk about in a minute. And another point of feedback was, why are we looking at only the least important things? We'd like to see all of the programs. So I'll walk you through that in the PowerPoint in just a second. But, at this time, when we're dealing with something as unknown and unexpected as COVID-19, sometimes it's easy to say, what are we doing this program prioritization for? There's lots of big things that we already have on our plate. But this is actually the right time to be setting your priorities, because it can be very easy to get off track and make decisions today that don't put you in the direction of meeting those 7 goals that you set. And so, you know, I'll walk through the process that we're going to use, because we can't obviously get into small groups now, and do this exercise, and I'll walk you through how we'll go about doing that. But, you know, right now, given where we're at, thought maybe we could have a little bit of discussion of, as we think about 2021 in the world that we're living in, we've got 7 goal areas. Are there any goal areas that the commission thinks, as everyone's going through and ranking these, we really ought to maybe weigh the value of, you know, whether it's infrastructure or health or community cohesion, you know, what's the moment asking us to look at and prioritize? Because right now those 7 goal areas are all equal, which is fine. But if there's some particular direction that you'd like to go, it'd be good to have a discussion so everyone can have that as a common point of reference. So thoughts?
Commissioner Kane.
Kind of like to stop and reevaluate, because we don't know, we're in a bad situation now, and we don't know how bad it's going to get. And I think we kind of got to slow some of this stuff down. And like Commissioner Bynum said, if we did this over again, I'm sure we would come up with different answers.
Mayor Albee.
Yes. I think it's interesting. There is a KC Rising, which is a regional, a metro area group that is looking at how does Kansas City as a metro area compare to peer metro areas in other parts of the nation, and how are we keeping up in terms of job growth, economic growth, and they've put together a task force to really look to see what will the recovery look like, what kind of shape will it look like if they're really if we end up in a recession, which looks like it almost has already happened, just in terms of jobless claims. But it seems to me that when we're in a situation like this, we kind of double down on those things which we think are going to put us in a good position for economic growth moving forward. And so again, it's, I think, bringing attention and care to our neighborhoods, making sure that as we do our economic development deals, that are community benefits. It's about building wealth in our community. The long-term things, I don't think those fundamentals change, but Commissioner Kane and Commissioner Bynum are right. We just don't know quite how this will play out. We're going to have to continue to look for those indicators that tell us what the topography is going to look like moving forward. But I think if we, again, focus on fundamentals, what drives economic growth, I think what drives economic growth for our county is going to be, are we an attractive, livable community? And what do we need to do for our neighborhoods to continue to attract people? If anything, the question of affordable housing is going to become even more central, because a lot of the people who are probably suffering the most are those who already have a hard time perhaps paying for housing. So that question of affordable housing, quality neighborhoods, I think is just going to become even more important at this point.
Commissioner Markley.
Commissioner Markley.
Mayor, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think what this really illustrates to us is why it's so critical for us to have both short-term and long-term goals. And our short-term goals are those things we're saying, this is what we want to accomplish in the next 6 months or the next year. But that long-term vision doesn't necessarily change. What we want for our residents as a whole doesn't necessarily change, and what we're looking forward to for our community long-term. But we have to have those short-term goals, and those short-term goals have definitely been altered by what's going on in the world right now, and will be every year as things happen. So I think we have to be flexible enough to handle and alter our short-term goals while still expecting those short-term goals to help lead us toward the long-term vision.
Commissioner Burrows.
Thank you. I guess the comment I would make is, how do we ramp up after this? What do we do to help our economy? It's not going to flip on overnight and become vibrant the next day. How can we bridge ourselves into moving forward after this, as the mayor stated, called this recession? So I believe one of the things we need to do collectively as a leadership team is to determine what actions we can take and what partners can we engage to ensure that our small businesses know what they need to do to ramp up. Our larger businesses, our large corporations, our Fortune 100, Fortune 500s know what they need to do, but we still should have a checklist in place so that those that are in the field today, those that are determined essential, will have a chance to transition out a little bit to get some rest. They're the ones taking the stress and the emotional toll right now, where those that have been quarantined and out of the system can move back in, but they need to move back in a environment that is controlled, sterile, and or at least economy forward. And it may be something that we can do itself.
Right. So as we're looking at the programs, it is important to think like what's happening right now. But as others have said, this is a short-term period, hopefully, that we have this disruption in our economy and community. But our longer-term goals are still those 7 goals. So keeping the eye on those and not doing things now that will take away from those and that will facilitate the recovery. And that's kind of what I'm hearing from the comments of maybe as we think about programs, which programs are going to put us in a better position to be resilient and recover more quickly. Everybody kind of agree? Oops, Mayor, you're not on. Okay.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. But I do think, again, back to, I think what we all understand is we really don't know what it looks like.
Yeah.
And, but the fundamentals remain, they're going to remain throughout. Well, I think maybe what we have to think about is as we come out of this, what message, what story do we want our residents to tell? And we want them to tell the story. Well, unified government coped with this. They got out in front of this. They took the right steps, to enforce the stay-at-home order. Those kinds of things that again, those were the resources need to go because we need to handle the COVID problem. But the story that people come out of this has to be that they didn't take their eye off the ball.
Right.
Right. They stayed with the community. They stayed with neighborhoods. We did what we could for our small business, and that's the kind of resiliency. It has to be a story of resiliency, I think.
Right. So as you're going through the programs, thinking which of the programs really support resiliency, what's going to keep us moving and what's going to, some of the things that you've talked about wanting to do, they may be delayed now, but you don't want to set them to the side and forget them. You want, when the economy starts churning, you want to be able to hit the ground running. And that's kind of what the prioritization is all about. So, kind of that's a little bit of a framework for you to think about as you go through the activity. I'll walk through what we're asking you to do, and then we can answer any questions, or we can have further discussion about the approach and mindset to use as we're going through the activity. So Melissa, can you pop the PowerPoint back up? All right. So instead of doing the group method of prioritizing programs, everybody's going to get to prioritize the programs themselves. So can you go to the next slide, please? So the way we're going to do this is we are going to email you a survey link that should come from Kathleen after this meeting. And it's going to be similar to what you did in your groups, but you're not going to have the good company and the enjoyment of the conversation. So when you get it, you will open the link to launch the survey. And in the survey, every program is listed. And you are going to look at those programs and evaluate whether we should stop the program, examine the options, or continue the program, the traffic signal exercise that you did before. So you'll do this individually. There's going to be an area for comment. The other thing, you received a packet today that had all of the materials that you will need to do this activity. So we've included all of the program cards, including quartile 1 through quartile 4 programs as ranked by staff. And that's how it's organized in the survey. And that is for you to have as information. How did staff do that? But that doesn't mean because it's a quartile 1, you can't say we need to stop this program. So that is kind of informational. And as Kathleen said, where the programs are is not fixed. So this is the part of the decision-making process in PBB of what are we going to do with all this data? The data doesn't do anything without decision makers deciding where to put resources. So in your packet, the following slides really just tell you what's in your packet. You'll have the PBB cards. And some of the feedback that we received on these is we need some definitions of what is the demand and mandate and population served. What do all those mean? It's a couple slides ahead. We don't have to jump to it, but there are definitions of each of those so that you can have that as a reference when you're looking at the card to interpret what that program is all about. One thing to note, we talked about there being over 300 programs. We're not asking you to do all 300 programs. And the reason not all 300 programs are included is because programs that recover more than 50% of their costs are not included. The other programs that are not included are the ones that are required by the federal government, the state government, or by charter. There's no point in you saying that they're low priority, but you have to do them. So we didn't want to use your time on that. Also included in your packet is the Unified Government's 7 strategic goals. And again, that's one just to have to the side on, to ask yourself, does this program move it toward any of these goals? And if, as we've talked about tonight, we are want to look at programs that are really going to build our resilience. Does it build resilience in any one of those areas? There's also the more detailed definitions behind the goal areas in case, it's been a while since you've gone through these in detail. So if you want to remember, okay, what does it mean what were we talking about when we were talking about improving community health? Let's look at that, because sometimes it might have health in the name of the program, but maybe it's not meeting some of those goals and definitions. So we wanted to give you all the information that you need because you'll be working independently on this through the survey. And it's a very straightforward survey, and you don't have to complete it all at one time. We've set it up so you can sit down and you could prioritize 5 programs, and you scroll to the bottom and hit done. And then you'll go back to the link and open it up, and your scores will still be there. So you can just go in and fill it in. So if you have questions about any of the programs, you can have a chance to ask. This is not going to need to be done until Friday, April 10th at 5 p.m. So you can go back and change your answers until then. So again, that link with instructions will come from Kathleen tonight. And I'm happy to help you if you have
Molly.
any questions. Yep.
Molly, Commissioner McKiernan has a question.
Okay.
I didn't necessarily need to interrupt, but one of the things that I'm wondering as I look at these cards is one of the things that crosses my mind a lot is, are we looking for efficiencies within a program? Not to say program overall, yes, no, green light, red light, but how are we allocating money within programs? How are we spending money within programs? Are we spending it most effectively and most efficiently?
Right.
And that's something I guess that this exercise will not let us get into.
Well, if you so one thing overall, and maybe Doug wants to jump in on this, one of the things that staff is committed to is really looking hard at the efficiency and seeing what efficiency gains there are that can save money. So that's there. But if there is a program that you think, this has a lot of merit, but I want somebody to dig in, it's a lot of money, let's see if we can do this more efficiently, or I have an idea for this one. That's one that falls in the yellow light category. And you could put in the comment section, say it's parks maintenance. You could say, I heard that Jackson County was doing this, and they're saving a ton of money. Can we, I want to throw that in as a thought. So I think that you can assume that staff is not just saying, well, this is how much they cost, we're not going to look for efficiencies. If they say green light, there will always be an effort to identify any efficiencies that can be gained.
I'm just going to jump right in here since I did have my hand raised again. So if, for example, one of us, I don't know who it might be, had looked at maybe spending per capita with our budget compared to other cities' budgets, both overall and within programs, this would be the place to bring that up.
Yep.
Okay.
So that seems like, one of those places where if you have ideas or knowledge that might be helpful to figure out, hey, if somebody's doing something at a much lower cost, let's put that in the hopper as something to look at.
Doug?
I think a lot of that is just what you said, Commissioner, that we are looking for ideas from everybody to come into this. I'm not really looking or expecting that any of the commissioners are going to be able to get into it and look at a program overall and say, boy, we ought to be able to do that for less cost. If you look at a program and we're spending, let's say, $1 million on something, and it's not one you look at and say, I necessarily think we should do away with it, but that's more money than you really think we should spend to our total budget. That's an area where you can hit that from a caution perspective. But by the sheer nature of PBB, it is not the biggest target for PBB really is to come back from a management tool. And so while we're giving things to the commissioners for you to prioritize on, it is one where it comes back to us as staff. As we've gone through, broke all these out into the mini program areas to see programs defined in areas that I didn't realize were defined in the way they are, and look at them and say, okay, does that necessarily need to be done that way, or is there a way to joint that with something else? So there is things we're looking at from efficiencies. And as you recall, when we set this up, Kathleen can probably remind me, but we set a number out there as to how much we're going to improve inefficiencies coming back into our operations. So there's some to just reduce, and then there's some money that falls back on us as a management team to find more efficiencies in our operations.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. As just to follow up what Doug said, actually the objective that we talked about in January was to identify 2.5 million in efficiencies. So that's what the target was. I did also want to mention that, as you know, there's over 150 other cities that are doing priority-based budgeting, larger cities across the country. And so many of them have very similar services to our own. And they all have populations. And so one of the things that we've can get from the Center for Priority-Based Budgeting is good benchmarking. Now, of course, the service level delivery, it varies from one community to the next, but I think that'd probably be very valuable information to prove as a judgment as to whether our spending level is consistent with other communities, or if it's high or low for any given program, or at least most of the programs. So, and we can put that together and provide it. We'd be happy to do that.
Kathleen, this is Harold. Would you be able to do that for a peer group of cities that are in a similar range attached to Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas?
Well, yeah, I mean, given that we can ask Chris Fabian to, give us a range of communities, and we can decide what's an appropriate peer, or a comparable peer. So, yeah.
Commissioner McKiernan?
Thank you, Kathleen. As I've shared with you, I have already started briefly looking at spending per capita and spending per square mile as a way to ask the question, how are we spending our money compared to other cities of similar size, both population and geography? And if the Center for Priority-Based Budgeting can give us more extensive information as a way to cross-compare ourselves against other municipalities, I think that would be extremely valuable.
So one of the things to let you know, what are we going to do with all of this? After everybody's completed the survey, what we're going to do is we will bring back to you where the programs landed. And then you can have a conversation in the future about the future of those programs. So it was a conversation that would have been great to have in person. Like the last time, people said, I want to find out why a group prioritized that in the way that they did. So we can come back and discuss that. One of the things that we're looking for is consensus on if 100% of people think something is a high priority, then that's going to be a program that gets invested in. If 100% of people say, why are we doing this program? That makes for a pretty easy thing to take off the table as something that the UG provides. So we'll be coming back with the results from that to have a future conversation with you and really kind of make the determination on what happens to those programs in the future budget process.
Commissioner McKiernan?
One more question, and you may be getting to this, and I'm jumping ahead, and I apologize if I am. The first 4 cards that are in the document that was provided to us this afternoon say rank 1 in the lower right-hand corner. Every other card in that document says quartile rather than rank.
It was, it should say, that rank means quartile. There was a search and replace of rank to quartile and didn't happen on the first page. Any other questions, comments?
So I did want to mention one other thing is that it's not coming. One thing that I will be providing you, but not tonight, is a document that may be rather thick that has more detailed information on every program. I'm still working on that tonight, but it's generated automatically by our PBB software. And so I'm giving it to you just so that you can have it as a reference if you wanted more information on a program. It would say, if you're asking yourself, gee, I wonder why this program costs $1 million, how much of it is in personnel and how much of it is other expenses, those sorts of big questions. So you're going to get that too, but you won't get it tonight. It'll be tomorrow morning.
Thank you. That sounds very helpful.
Okay, Mayor. Well, I think we're ready to wrap this up, and I'll make a couple of comments at this point, I guess. As you hear where we're at from the PBB perspective, if you can go through and spend some time working with those cards, it would help us in continuing that process as we look ahead to April 10th to try to get information back into that. When I look ahead for budget direction, one of the big things we're looking at is our next meeting on it is, I think, April 23rd, when we come back and start talking about capital. So another area for budget expense. Now, as you all know, a lot of our expenditures in capital are based on where we're at from a debt. So that's not really a now perspective, but we'll be coming back and talking about some of the cash things that we're able to move out of that budget. And then if there's some different ideas about approaching our debt funded projects and where that may be able to help us as we go forward with this, but we'll be continuing to mature, one, looking at where we are from revenue projections, but also our cost of operations and ways we look where we can hold back. I mean, it is a charge I'll be putting out there to the department heads as they are having to spend more money in certain areas. If there's areas we can hold back on it as we look through this coming year. I do think your points about coming out of this and wanting to land on our feet and move forward quickly. Well, the reality of that is if I cut back on my operational spend for what I'm going to have the rest of the year and hold back on my hiring, I can't come out of it as quickly. So the easier way to do that is to put more burden back on our reserves and spend money out of our fund balance. Now that that gets a little more scary if you think about, does something from this last on to the next year if we hit our fund balance as hard as we take the full blunt out of it from that side. But my easiest way to come out of it is to be ready to come out in full operational mode and hit the rest of the year going. So
Commissioner Bynum would like to speak.
Okay.
Thank you. Doug, to your last couple of points, I'm wondering if we could look back to those very beginning slides at the presentation, just for purposes of if our goal is 2 months operating in reserves, I don't think we've actually hit that yet, have we?
No, we would still be a little bit above that. Or no, we would go below that if we spend $11.5 million from our reserve account. So as you see, she's got that put up there that our projected, we're at 26 million. And if you take that 11.5 million, we're down to 14.6.
Mm-hmm.
Kathleen, what's that number supposed to be? Around 17 to 18? We have Kathleen muted.
Okay, you, I think you needed to go to the next slide, please.
Well, I think we're just, what's
Here's
the
the best
two-month
slide.
reserve number?
So over on the left, on the right-hand side, there's a little percentage. So that's the percentage of reserve that we're anticipating would be achieved if we took no action. We have been at the 20% level for the past few years, roughly. And but the target is 17%. So we've exceeded it. So, but we would dip below 17% if we took no action in 20 and again in 2021.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, if there are any other questions or comments? All right, well.
I just have one small thing to Commissioner McKiernan's point. The first page of cards is a repeat of what's on the second page of cards. So you can just ignore the one that says rank and go immediately to the next one because they're just duplicates with different word. So just to make sure people aren't confused.
Commissioner Burrows?
We need to unmute Commissioner Burrows.
Commissioner Burrows, can you unmute yourself?
Thank you. I sincerely appreciate everyone's participation this evening. But I would like to go on record, and please don't take this as being a confrontational statement, that I made my statement early. I believe we should look at the 2-month impact minimum. I truly believe it will prepare us as we go through the priority-based budgeting. As we all know, it's changed. The dynamics have changed considerably. I also would like to go on record as stating, Doug, you had mentioned that you'd like to get back up to full steam as quick as possible. I'd like us to have an action plan in place on how we're going to do that. I truly believe it is to our benefit to have something in writing and or in print that we can all follow and participate and help with that. These are trying times. They're very fluid. I sincerely appreciate the leadership we've been able to provide to this community, and I want to participate in that. I truly believe that we as leaders have an obligation and a responsibility to look at not only the best case of scenarios, but the worst case of scenarios. And I anticipate that we're going to be in this for at least 2 months. And I want to be on record as stating my comments so that we can go back and reflect on those if we need be. Please prove me wrong.
Are there any other comments, questions? Just to be clear, if we need assistance with this, who do we reach out to?
I think if you're talking about assistance to come back into it on a question on a particular card.
Right, anything like that.
Yeah.
I think I would probably target you to Allie is coming back to work for us. If you go to her or Emmerich, if you ask a question, then they could target it back to the right person to be able to answer it. So finance staff will be focusing on some other things as they go through. So I think if we get the questions to one of those two, then they'll get the right person to get the answer to you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes our special session.
Thank you.